The Outcast of the Glen. Characters: Mairi, formerly Carol, the minister, Mairi's father; Laird Alistair, formerly Clyde; Caelan, formerly Chosa; Elspeth, formerly Nakoma. She traded herself for shelter, but the lonely command she gave her a home, a heart, and a future no one else had ever offered her. Scottish Highlands, 1746. The winter season held the land in its cracked grip. Winds carried gray mist across the horizon, painting the sky with slate. The sun was a dull silver coin, glaring without warmth. The mountains stood like old bones beneath a wide, empty sky. The stone kirk stood on the edge of the glen, its gray walls now streaked with wind-blown rain. Inside, the pews were empty, the air still and heavy with damp and secrets. Mairi moved softly down the side aisle, a book of psalms pressed against her chest. She was dressed modestly as always, a plain wool dress, hair tied in a ribbon that had once been green. Her face bore the gentle, clean-lined beauty of someone taught to keep her chin down and her prayers up. She had come to tidy the altar, but stopped when she heard voices near the vestry door. Low male, she paused, half hidden behind the pulpit. "I do not have silver," came her father's voice, reverent, measured, the tone of a man who had delivered sermons with fire and consequence for 20 years. "But I have a daughter." Silence. Then, Laird Alistair's voice, greasy with satisfaction. "I will treat her like something precious," he said, "so long as she learns her place." Mairi's breath caught, her grip on the hymnal tightened. She stepped into the doorway, her heart pounding beneath her collar. "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice clear, slicing through the musty air like a bell. Both men turned. Her father's face went tight, with something between shame and rage. Alistair just smiled, tipping his bonnet with the flick of 2 fingers. "I heard you," she said, staring at the man she had once believed walked with God. "You're selling me." Her father stepped forward. "Do not speak in that tone. Is it unholy to ask for the truth?" Her voice rose, or just inconvenient. He slapped her. The sound echoed off the stone walls. She staggered back, hand to her cheek. He did not look sorry. "Suffering," he said, "is the cost of salvation. You will do your duty as your mother did before you." Mairi's eyes filled not with tears, but with clarity. "No," she said, breathless, "not like this." That night, under a half-moon drowned in mist, she was led to a carriage. 2 of Alistair's hired men stood by, eyes hard beneath brimmed hats. She wore her Sunday dress and carried nothing. Her father did not kiss her goodbye. The wheels turned. The village faded. Hours passed. Heather stretched endlessly on both sides, cold and waiting. She watched the driver, the shape of him hunched in the lantern light, and felt the panic building in her chest. Her fingers curled into fists, her breath quickened. Then she moved. With a cry like an animal, she threw herself from the carriage. The impact tore her dress. Her knees hit stone. She rolled, mud in her mouth, in her eyes, pain burning along her arms and back. The carriage kept going. She pushed herself up, staggering to her feet. Blood ran from a cut on her brow. Her ankle twisted with each step, but she moved away from the road, into the dark outline of the crags, into the pines where shadows waited. No plan, no food, no map, only escape, and the sound of her own breath breaking in the silence of the wild. Mairi did not remember when she collapsed. Somewhere between pain and nightfall, her legs had given way beneath her. Her body was too dry to sweat, too bruised to ache. The mountain air no longer bit at her skin. She no longer felt cold. She simply sank, into peat, into silence, into a place between waking and gone. Snow fell in patches across the high ridges that year, rare and sudden, soft against the bones of the earth. A thin layer clung to the heather, painting the dying leaves with white. Caelan saw her first as a shape, too still, too out of place. He had been tracking deer along the southern ridge, bow in hand, feet silent on the frost. But the moment his eyes caught the figure crumpled beside a twisted rowan, he knew this was no animal. He approached slowly, crouched low, his eyes sharp. The girl, young, pale, skin flushed red with cold. Her dress was torn at the hem, soaked in old blood and dirt. Her face was scraped, lips cracked, lashes stiff with frost. But what stopped him was not the blood or the bruises. It was what hung around her neck, a worn cord tied with a small bundle of plaid, blue, green, and one faded crimson thread. He reached out, brushing the cloth gently with the back of his hand. The pattern, the weave, he recognized it. He was of the old clans, hidden, sacred, a token carried by those born of the glen, but lost to time or fate. It meant one who may return, a whisper of lineage, a sign to welcome, not as kin, but as soul reborn. He did not question how she had it. Not yet. He lifted her carefully, her limbs light and cold in his arms. Back at the hidden settlement, the firelight flickered across rough stone and carved posts. Caelan did not take her to the men or the chief. He brought her to Elspeth. The old woman sat beside a low fire, her long gray hair braided with thistle and bone. She looked up as he entered, her dark eyes narrowing. "She is marked," he said in the old Gaelic, laying the girl gently on a bed of woven reeds. Elspeth leaned in, touched the woven token. She nodded once. "The earth brings back what was taken." Caelan did not reply. He left her there in the warmth of Elspeth's lodge and stepped back into the night. Mairi woke to the smell of peat smoke and the soft crackle of fire. Her vision blurred, but the heat was real. So was the blanket of wool pulled over her. Her throat ached. Her lips barely moved. A bowl of water was lifted to her mouth. She drank. Elspeth watched her with eyes like river stones, patient, quiet, knowing. Mairi tried to speak. "Where?" The old woman hushed her with a gesture. "Rest. The wind will wait." Later, when her strength returned in fragments, Mairi sat up. The blanket slipped from her shoulders. She saw the threads lying beside her. She touched them, then looked at Elspeth. "I don't know where it came from," she said. "It was my mother's." She never said why. Elspeth's gaze did not waver. "That is enough." Mairi swallowed hard. "Please, I have nowhere else. I'll do anything to stay." Her voice shook. She lowered her eyes. "I'll give myself if that's what it costs." There was a sound then, soft like a breath behind her. Caelan had entered, silent as ever. He stood at the doorway, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He stepped forward, looked at her fully, then said, voice low, calm, but unyielding, "This is not a place where bodies are traded for belonging." Mairi stared at him. He continued, "You may work, learn, heal, but here gratitude is not measured by flesh." Then he turned and left. Mairi's hand went to her necklace. Outside, the snow began to melt beneath the first real sun in days. Under the pale light of the Highland moon, Mairi swept ash from the fire ring with the branch of a juniper. It was the third morning since her body had begun to feel like it belonged to her again. Elspeth sat nearby, rolling crushed leaves between her fingers, the scent of wild mint and sweet grass thick in the air. "You do not stir the pot until it breathes," Elspeth said, handing Mairi a carved wooden spoon. "Not before, not after." Mairi leaned over the clay pot. Steam curled from the edge of the bubbling stew, wild hare, dried grain, kale, and mountain herbs. Her hands trembled with the weight of doing it right. "Like this?" she asked. Elspeth nodded once. "You're teaching me to cook like I belong here." "I'm teaching you to eat without burning down the lodge," the old woman replied. That made Mairi smile, small but real. Each morning began like this, with fire, with roots dug from soil, still clinging to memory, with words spoken between stirring and silence. Elspeth's lessons were never explained. They were given, passed like seeds from one hand to another. How to grind bark into healing salve, how to pack salt into meat, how to bind wounds with willow and patience. Mairi's fingers blistered, her eyes watered from the smoke. But she kept working. Now she had an in. Caelan watched, though he rarely spoke. He moved through the village, like a shadow bound to rhythm. He brought water from the burn, left it near the tent flap without a word. He dropped kindling by the fire, sharper than it needed to be. He noticed when her blanket slipped in the night, and placed another over her shoulders. She never heard him approach, only noticed warmth where there had been none. One morning, while hanging dried herbs from the lodge beams, Mairi caught Elspeth humming a song that made her pause. It was familiar. Too familiar. She turned slowly. "My mother," she said, "used to hum that when she worked in the garden." Elspeth said nothing at first. Then, "What was her name?" "Amara." The old woman stilled. "She had a scar behind her left ear," Mairi added, reaching instinctively to touch her own. "Said it came from falling off a pony as a child." Elspeth's eyes sharpened, but her voice remained soft. "She was one of us before they took her, before they gave her a name that fit their books." Mairi felt the air leave her chest. Her hands dropped to her lap. "She never told me," she whispered. "She just gave me the token and said someday it will guide you home." "She did not forget," Elspeth said. She waited for the world to remember her. Later that night, while stirring the stew again, Mairi turned to Caelan, who was sharpening a knife near the doorway. "My mother was of the clans," she said, not asking, not questioning. Caelan looked up. "I think I understand why she stayed quiet," she added. He nodded. "She was not silent," he said. She was surviving. Mairi began to see things differently after that. Not just the village, but the earth itself, the way it held water after a storm, the way fire cracked when the wood was too dry. The way Elspeth's hands moved over plants like they were grandchildren, and the way Caelan stepped around wildflowers, never on them. "Don't try to understand a person by what they say," Elspeth said once, slicing fruit with a bone knife. "Watch how they touch the earth." Mairi repeated that to herself often. It became a rhythm, like breath, like prayer. One afternoon she sat alone, fingers tracing the embroidery on her tunic. The village children played nearby, shouting words in Gaelic she did not yet know but wanted to. She no longer flinched when someone looked at her. She no longer asked what she was doing here, because something in the soil had begun to recognize her, and at last she was starting to recognize it back. The nights had turned colder. The stars, once sharp against the black, were now hidden behind a veil of cloud. The sky looked empty, and the darkness pressed closer than it had before. Mairi sat beside the cooking fire in Elspeth's lodge, staring into the flames until her eyes burned. Her hands were red from scrubbing hides. Her sleeves were damp. Her heart felt like a fragile thing, beaten thin. Behind her, the quiet of the village was too loud, too watching. It had started with a silence. Then came the looks, sideways, narrowed, sharpened like flint knives. Then the whispers, too soft to hear clearly, but sharp enough to wound. One morning she found ashes in the water pot. Not just soot, but burned refuse, twisted roots, and something bitter. Elspeth said nothing, just emptied it with a sigh and began boiling new herbs. Another time, the thread she used to mend a child's tunic was sliced short, the strands fraying mid-stitch. The tunic was ruined. Then came the dress, the one Elspeth had gifted her, simple but woven with careful hand. She found it ripped down the back seam, left folded as if untouched. Mairi said nothing, neither did Caelan, but the next evening, her tunic was mended. The thread matched perfectly. The next morning, the water jar was full again, cool and clean. She began noticing other things. A new bundle of sage left near her sleeping mat. A row of dried meat hung a little closer to the lodge than usual. The firewood pile refilled during the night. She never saw him do it, but she knew. Caelan's hands were in the quiet. Still, the nights remained heavy. And one night, when the fire flickered low and Elspeth had gone to sleep, Mairi sat alone on the dirt floor, arms wrapped around her knees. She cried quietly. Not the sharp, gasping kind of grief, but the slow, worn kind, the kind that lives in your ribs and trickles out when no one is looking. She had worked, learned, bled. She had never asked for kindness, only space to breathe. And still, it was not enough. A shadow moved outside the lodge. Then Caelan stepped in. He said nothing. He crouched beside the fire, reached into the pouch at his side, and pulled out a small object wrapped in deerskin tied with sinew. He offered it to her. Mairi took it carefully, her fingers brushing his. She unwrapped it. Inside was a pouch of ash, dark, fine, and fragrant, mixed with crushed cedar and a sliver of bone. It was not just ash. It was ancestral, a sacred gift, a sign of inclusion, of memory, of shared fire. Mairi stared at it, tears still drying on her cheeks. She asked, voice, "Why do you believe in me?" Caelan did not speak. Instead, he reached down to the earth. With one finger he drew in the dust. Slow, precise strokes. She leaned forward to read it. "Because you did not beg. You only asked to do." Mairi's breath caught. She looked up at him. He looked back, not with softness but with truth. In the silence under a sky with no stars, she felt something shift. Not acceptance, not yet, but the beginning of something better, something earned. Each morning, before the sun climbed high enough to warm the valley, Mairi sat cross-legged in the dust beside the village children. They circled her like sparks around a flame, sticks in hand, scratching lines and symbols into the earth with bright-eyed focus. It had become a ritual now, these lessons not bound by chalk or books, but by patience and dirt, by rhythm and memory. Elspeth stood behind them, arms folded, her voice steady as she guided them through the morning's words in Gaelic. Her cadence was slow, almost like music, shaping each syllable as if it were something sacred. "Angel," she said, pointing toward the glowing hearth nearby. "Fire," Mairi echoed, tongue catching slightly on the sounds, her voice softer than the others. She tried again. The children giggled, not unkindly, but with that honest joy only children carry. One girl leaned over, touching Mairi's hand, repeating the words slowly until they said it together. When Mairi finally pronounced it right, the group cheered as if she had sung the sun up herself. Later that week, Elspeth gave Mairi a string of bark fiber and told her to ask the children for more words: air, water, stone. Each answer came with more laughter, more shared glances. Language was no longer just sound. It was access. It was ceremony. It was invitation. One afternoon, the usual rhythm shattered. Shouts rose from the riverbank. Mairi looked up, heart stalling. A boy, no more than 5, had slipped on a mossy rock while reaching for a floating bundle of leaves. The river was swollen from last night's rain, colder and faster than usual. His small arms thrashed, panic rising with the current. She didn't hesitate. Her feet hit the water with a splash, skirt dragging heavy behind her, hair whipping in her face. She lunged forward, her fingers finding the collar of his tunic just as he dipped beneath the surface. She pulled, tumbled, went under, came back up. The cold bit deep, but her grip held. By the time they collapsed onto the muddy bank, both coughing and gasping, the village had gathered. No one said a word. They only watched, and then slowly, silently, they turned and returned to their lives. But that night, when Mairi sat by her fire, arms wrapped around herself beneath the thin blanket, she found a small clay bowl placed near the coals. Inside were ripe berries, plump and dark. Their sweetness untouched, she stared at them for a long time. The next morning, Elspeth handed her a shawl woven from soft wool, dyed with crushed roots stitched with simple red patterns. "A thank you," the old woman said. She didn't say from whom. Mairi didn't ask, but she felt the shift. It came in glances that no longer slid away too fast, in greetings offered first, in children who ran to her before sunrise, tugging her sleeves and pointing to words she had taught them. Even the older women, once tight-lipped and watchful, began to nod when she passed. Caelan remained the same, silent, constant, distant, but always near, until one evening near dusk, the sky painted with streaks of pink and violet, he approached. Mairi was grinding dried corn outside the lodge, her fingers stiff from the day's labor. She looked up as his shadow fell across her. In his hand, he held a small bundle wrapped in worn buckskin. He offered it without words. She wiped her palms on her skirt and took it gently. "What is it?" she asked. He didn't answer. She unwrapped it slowly, careful with the ties. Inside was a bracelet, soft leather woven tightly, its center marked by a carved bead. The etching was deliberate, delicate. One word, Nita. She ran her thumb across it, voice catching. "What does it mean?" Caelan's voice was low, barely above the wind. "The one who begins again." Her throat tightened. She stared at him, the world narrowing to fire light and breath. "Is that me?" she asked. He nodded. She looked down, then up again, eyes shimmering. "If I am the beginning," she whispered, "then you are where I begin." Caelan didn't smile, but in his gaze she saw something deeper than approval. Recognition. And in his stillness she felt more seen than in all the pews and prayers of her old world. They stood there as the sun slipped behind the hills, the evening stretching wide around them. No vows, no confessions, only the quiet gravity of two people once broken, now slowly, deliberately becoming whole. The sun had not yet reached its highest when the dust rose at the edge of the Highland village. Horses 5, maybe 6. Their riders wore capes and grim expressions, faces hardened by greed and arrogance. At their center rode Laird Alistair, his silver belt buckle glinting like a badge of conquest, not faith. Children scattered at the first sign. Women pulled them close. Men stepped from tents, silent, swords and bows in hand. No one shouted. No one ran. Mairi stood at the edge of the lodge, her hands still dusted with meal from the morning's grinding, her breath caught in her throat, but she did not move back. She saw him, Alistair, his face unchanged, like time hadn't touched him since that night he bought her. With a handshake and a lie, he dismounted slowly, the leather of his boots creaking as they hit the dry ground. His eyes swept over the gathered clan, then landed on her. "There she is," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "My runaway dove." The warriors did not move. Mairi stepped forward. "I'm not yours," she said, voice steady. Alistair smirked. "I paid for you, girl. What you did after that, running off like some outlaw bride, that's on you. But you don't get to stay here. You paid for silence," she said. "You paid for obedience. But I wasn't yours then, and I'm not yours now." Alistair's face darkened. He turned toward the gathered men. "You think this little village can stand against the law?" he shouted. "I've got men behind me with more bullets than you have arrows. You give her up now, or I burn this place to the ground." That was when Caelan stepped forward. He didn't speak. He didn't draw his blade. He simply walked between Mairi and Alistair. Then he raised his spear, not in aggression, but in declaration. More men came to stand beside him, one by one, until a line had formed, not in anger, but in truth. Alistair's horse shuffled beneath him, uneasy. Elspeth stepped forward next. She held something wrapped in cloth, cradled like a sacred fire. She stopped a few paces from Alistair and unwrapped it. A woven token, worn, old. Mairi's eyes widened. That, Elspeth said, her voice clear, was her mother's, a daughter of our people taken long ago. This one carries her blood, her name, her place. Alistair stared at it, then at Mairi, then back at the clan. No one moved. No one blinked. The wind kicked up dust between them. Alistair looked down, adjusted his bonnet, spat once. Then he turned without a word, mounted his horse and rode off. His men followed, their silence louder than any threat. Mairi let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Caelan turned, lowered his spear. Elspeth placed the token in Mairi's hand. "You are not theirs," the old woman said softly. "You were never meant to be." Mairi clutched it tight, and for the first time she believed it. The morning of the naming day dawned clear and windless, the sky wide and pale like new parchment. Smoke from the sacred fire curled lazily into the air, rising straight as a line drawn by the spirits. The village gathered in a slow, reverent circle, each person carrying something, a feather, a stone, a carved bead, to lay beside the central flame. Mairi stood near the edge, heart pounding beneath her woven shawl. Her hands were steady, but the breath inside her fluttered like a trapped bird. She wore a tunic dyed with ochre and ash sewn by Elspeth's hands, and around her neck hung the bracelet Caelan had given her, the bead still bearing her name. "Nita, a new beginning." Elspeth stepped forward, her voice low but strong. "Today we speak a name that has not yet been said, a name given not by birth but by journey, not by blood alone but by fire walked, pain endured, and truths claimed." She held a long cloth in her arms, a shawl dyed in the deep red of clay and the smoky black of burned peat. At its center was an embroidered flame, circled by patterns of leaves and stars. "The firekeeper's cloth," Elspeth said, "passed from one to the next, but only when the fire itself chooses." Mairi stepped forward. Knees did not tremble. Eyes did not drop. Elspeth draped the shawl across her shoulders, tying it with a knot that sat over her heart. "From this day you are Nita, and you will carry the flame," the circle murmured, not with doubt, but with recognition. One of the children, the same boy she had pulled from the river weeks ago, came forward. He offered her a scrap of bark etched with symbols, marks she had taught him to write just days before. She took it gently, kneeling. She whispered, "Thank you," and smiled when the boy grinned wide in return. That night she sat by the hearth at the center of the village. The fire had burned low, not with neglect, but intention. She leaned in and fed it dried herbs and a pinch of cedar ash. The flames flared gold and red, and everyone watched as the sparks rose like spirits answering the call. In the days that followed, Mairi's place became clear. She rose before dawn and tended the sacred fire, whispering the old names as Elspeth had taught her. Children gathered near her feet, waiting for stories. She told them in both tongues. "In the beginning," she said in English, then in Gaelic, "there was only wind and song." Her voice flowed like the stream nearby, slow and steady, brushing the roots of memory. She taught them to shape symbols in dirt, to carve lines into bark, to speak of who they were and who they would become. In the evenings, Caelan sat nearby, sometimes sharpening tools, sometimes just listening. He never interrupted. He never asked her to. When the fire burned down, she covered it with ash. When the sun rose, she woke it again. She was not a girl stolen, not a bride sold, not a stranger given shelter. She was Nita now, and the stories she told would carry the clan's soul further than any trail ever could. The spring sun was gentle over the Highland village, its light sifting through budding leaves and draping soft gold across woven tents and stone huts. It was ceremony day, the day every family wore its best regalia, and the air thrummed with music, the steady beat of drums, the haunting wail of flutes, soft chants in an ancient tongue. They cleared a space in the center of the encampment, a circle of earth and prayer, and all faces turned as she entered. Nita stepped forward, no longer Mairi the outsider, but Nita reborn. Her dress was a tapestry of earth and sky, woven with deep indigo and fiery ochre, with beadwork tracing flames and blossoms across her shoulders, hair braided with tassels that chimed softly as she walked. Her eyes were steady, her chin lifted, voice sure. She paused at the circle's edge, the hush pressing around her like a breath held. Children reached for her hand, the elders inclining their heads, and Caelan stood among them, his posture still reserved, his gaze still quiet and unreadable. Nita drew in a long breath, eyes sweeping the circle, feeling the history and future of the tribe woven together in those gazes. "I was not born here," she began, her voice carrying over soft drumbeat. "But my spirit, it has come home from the place it was taken." A murmur rippled through the circle. She paused and voices stilled. "It was stolen when my mother was pulled away, when my cradle was packed away, and when my name was changed." She paused again, as if gathering every word like a prayer. But the earth remembered me. The wind remembered me, and the people here saw me not as something strange or borrowed, but as flame rekindled. Her hand drifted to the embroidered fire on her chest. Threads of red and gold glinted. Today I am reborn. I am Nita. She stepped back, and the music stilled completely. For the first time, Caelan moved. He walked forward through the circle, boots silent on softened earth, breath measured, eyes on her until he stood just before her. The crowd parted for him like water around a stone. He bowed his head, then raised it, and let his gaze meet hers. He said one word, his voice low but certain, "Nita." The circle went still again. She blinked once, then her face glowed with something fierce and tender. Tears streamed down her cheeks, not of shame, but of belonging finally claimed. "Nita," he repeated, this time softer, almost a refrain to her name. He swallowed and said, voice trembling but strong, "You are my home." He closed the distance between them with a single step. No flourish, no ceremony, only intention. He rested his hand against her shoulder. The drum resumed, slow, steady, like the promise of a heartbeat. Nita took his hand and raised it, letting the crowd see the joining of two hands, the outsider and the keeper. Spirits stirred in the smoke. Children leaned in. Elders nodded, and the earth felt kind. The ceremony continued then. The blessings, the songs given in both English and Gaelic, the sharing of food and tobacco, the stamping of feet in thunder and praise. Nita stood hand in hand with Caelan, their eyes locked, the names binding them into one story that would carry forward. Afterward, there was dancing, firelight beneath stars, laughter bending the night air. Nita moved through both worlds in her steps, the hesitant grace of the girl, and the determined rhythm of the woman who had found herself here. Caelan followed, sometimes in silence, other times they exchanged looks that carried centuries. By the time the moon climbed high, Nita and Caelan had woven themselves into the circle as if they had always been there. Their hands brushed often. He offered her his cloak. She smiled and accepted. The drum beat wound down to embers of sound. When the last notes faded, Nita and Caelan stood alone in the center, sorrow and joy woven through the crowd. Silence. Caelan spoke again, this time for more than himself. His words rolled clear over the night. "Our stories begin far apart," he said, voice soft but rich. "But fire guides us. The flame we carry between us is no stranger." He paused and turned, addressing the village. Each word honored the ancestors. "Nita," he said once more, "carries the blood of our people. She carries our language. She carries our fire." Heads inclined. "The daughter who left and came back," Caelan continued, "brings with her the courage of two worlds. That is not weakness, that is strength." The village broke into song, then, soft, rising, sweeping. Nita and Caelan joined hands and stepped back to the edge of the circle. She leaned into him and whispered so that only he could hear. "We are home." He brushed her hair away from her face, his fingers gentle. "Yes," he said. "We are home." And in that moment, beneath stars that had danced above the land long before any name was given, Nita, smiled without fear, held by a man who understood that home wasn't a place. It was belonging. It was heart. It was chosen, and the night carried their story onward. If that story moved you, if you felt the fire in Mairi's journey, the quiet strength of Caelan and the power of love that chooses instead of conquers, then this is the place for you. Please like and share this video, and subscribe for US Wild West love story of forbidden hearts, lost souls, and love that rises from dust and silence. Out here, every sunset holds a secret. Every trail tells a truth. And somewhere between the glen and the thunder, two people always find each other. Hit that subscribe button. Your next story is waiting.